My name is Louise Paquette, and I have the privilege to introduce Mr. Norman Lévesque, who has a remarkable experience in various fields of activities, even though being only 27 years old. Norman was responsible for the youth pastoral care in the Diocese of Saint-Jean-Longueuil, near Montreal. He completed a certificate of theology at the Université de Montréal. He is a consecrated lay person. At the same time, he finished a bachelor's in science high school teaching and has been doing loads of public awareness in science. On one side, faith and pastoral care. On the other side, sciences and discovery of the physical systems. Those two visions of life gave him the birth of environmental values, taking care of our environment for generations to come, and by solidarity with other living beings. Norman has worked at the Biosphere, Environment Canada's museum, and he is a speaker for Équiterre on the subject of climate change. He just finished the first half of the Masters in Atmospheric Sciences at Université du Québec à Montréal. But his most cherished project is called Guardians of Creation, a tool for environmental education in the churches of the province. Norman, please.
Merci, thank you. J'ai remarqué quelques personnes du Québec qui sont ici. Merci d'être venus me voir. They couldn't attend the one in French on Saturday, so thanks for coming. This is the first time I'm doing it in front of so many people. And it's also the first time I'm presenting Eucharist and environment, because I've done lots of stuff on eco-spirituality, outside the church, inside the church. But to talk about the Eucharist, which is a sacrament which is very important to me, it's a real honor to have you here. Thanks. She gave a good introduction to me, so I don't need to explain more. I worked in an environmental museum, so on one side I have the environment, and on the other side I worked in pastoral care. So spirituality, environment. Is there a link between the two? Do Christians have a responsibility to protect creation? Yes. All right. Good energy. I am a consecrated layperson, so here are my 4 promises that were blessed by my bishop in Saint-Jean-Longueuil. Service, simplicity, respect of the body, that's for sexuality and for health, and protection of creation. I chose those 4 words because the 3 traditional words that I hear for monks or religious didn't quite ring a bell for me. And since I was a consecrated lay, well, I could choose the words I wanted. So those are the ones that echoed the most in my heart. But they all have their equivalent, actually. What's my mission? The mission of Guardians of Creation is to help develop environmental education in our church. I do this by 4 means. Rereading many biblical stories. Everything is available on my website if you want to go see different examples of biblical stories that are reread through the eyes of an environmentalist. It can be really helpful for homilies or even for catechesis. The history of saints, some stories of saints. St. Francis of Assisi is a classic one. But there's also St. Kevin in Ireland. Spent lots of time in nature. Actually, more time with animals than with humans. St. Clement of Rome, which was, I believe, the 4th or 5th pope. He lived around the year 100. He wrote an epistle, and there's a whole chapter that has to do with creation, and it's really beautiful. So I give that on my website, different tools for you to use. I do different presentation in churches, and I give tools for churches to change. This was actually an amazing year for me, for lots of reasons, because I've just finished my master's in atmospheric science. I've been giving presentations on climate change for an organization called Équiterre, which is kind of the Quebec version of the David Suzuki Foundation. So I've been giving about 20 presentations on climate change. I do some on eco-spirituality too. And just to top it off, guess who I met last month? I'm part of the 250 Canadians that were trained by Al Gore to give his presentation, his slideshow. I have it on my computer. So it was an honor meeting all these people. I took a coffee with David Suzuki. I met Jean Lemire, who went to the South Pole and made a movie. So I've been meeting these very special people who are not necessarily Christian, but they have this great spirituality. They're linked to other creatures that they want to protect. And I think that's something that we can add to our faith. So I'm here to talk about Eucharist and environment. Let's start with the word Thanksgiving. Now, in my certificate in theology, I did 10 courses in theology. One of them was Eucharist. And I remember the professor totally flipping my mind by explaining something that I never really thought of before. I remember when the priest, every Mass, puts his hands like this for consecration. Okay? And he's a priest too, the teacher, the professor. And so, me with a movement like that, I always imagined that during Mass, the most important thing that happens is from up to down. That the Eucharist is something that happens from up to down. He said, no, it's the other way around. This painting actually shows an example of that. You can see the people on the ground. They're all pointing toward the altar, and that goes up. The moment of the Eucharist is a moment where it goes from down to up. It's Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving for everything around us. Just an example. When we retell the story of Jesus at the Last Supper, he takes the bread, gives thanks, breaks it, and gives it to his disciples. 4 verbs. Takes it, gives thanks, breaks it, and gives it. So he gives thanks. It's not, he didn't bless the bread. He blessed God for the bread. And that, when I hear that, that's environmental education. That is thanking God for all the goodness, all the things we have around us. And plus, it's his body, so we should be careful whichever bread we use. What are we thankful for? Well, air, water, soil, vegetables, animals all around us. Me personally, every time I go to a Eucharist celebration, I go with the mindset which St. Francis of Assisi had, being thankful for all around. Being thankful for what's in my life is one good step, because atheists don't do that. Okay? Thankful for what's in my life. Thankful for my family. Thankful for my community. And then you go even farther and thankful for all my surroundings, the environment. The other word, Eucharist. Now, last year I went to Ireland and England, and while I was in the British Museum, I saw this sculpture. Now, there's a foot, and over it is the origin of the word Eucharist. It's in Greek, Eucharisterion. So, what does that have to do with a foot? This is an example of how the Greeks thought with the Greek mythology. There was a man that had a certain problem with his foot. And after praying the gods, he was healed. So after being healed, he made this sculpture with the names of the 2 gods and underneath the word Eucharist. In this context, the word Eucharist means great thank you. That's the origin of the word. And when I saw the example with the sculpture, I said, wow, that's what it means. It's a great thank you. It's a time of thanksgiving. So, a question you can answer. do you think the Mass, the Eucharist, has potential to do environmental education? I believe so, otherwise I wouldn't be here. So what I'm going to do during this presentation, in the first part, I'll show prayers that already exist in the Mass, that already show that we're linked to our environment and we must protect it. And in the second part, I'll propose certain things that we could do a little bit more, a little bit better. So let's start. Which prayers am I talking about? These two. Blessed are you, Lord, God of all creation. Through your goodness, we have this bread to offer. And same thing for the wine. Blessed are you, Lord, God of all creation. Through your goodness, we have this wine to offer. Now, a couple of people here might know that these prayers don't come from a Christian background. They're from the Jewish religion. Exactly, the Jews. During the Last Supper, Jesus was celebrating Passover. Passover it's during which season? Easter, spring, right. Spring, when everything sprouts up, when everything is reborn. So, this is kind of cool, because when everything is reborn, the Jews were thanking God for the things around, because God provides for us. God gives us what we need. And if we didn't have another spring, if we didn't have all the right conditions, well, we couldn't have the bread and the wine. So every spring, they say thanks, especially for that. Us Christians, I have to take some water. In my own bottle. Reusable. Us Christians, we say these prayers every Sunday. And if we go to Mass every day, we hear this every day. We are thanking God for the goodness all around us every day. This is a painting I saw in Italy, in a Franciscan monastery. And I thought it was pretty interesting because they didn't have tables and chairs back then. So that's probably a good idea of what it looked like. A bunch of people sharing. And saying thanks for the goodness of what God gives us through the earth. The bread and the wine are fruits of the earth, fruits of the vine. And we're thanking Him because if ever something bad happens, well, He can't provide for us anymore. So then the vine goes bad. So what I'm going to do first is we'll see the bread, then the wine. Here's the complete prayer. Blessed are you, Lord, God of all creation. Through your goodness, we have this bread to offer, which earth has given and human hands have made. It will become for us the bread of life. The symbolism is really important because at the Last Supper, Jesus took two elements of a meal and presented it and said, hey, guys, this is me. And He gave that as a heritage. Now, at the end of my life, which I hope won't be soon, at the end of my life, I could choose a memento, a something to give someone and say, remember me with this. Do you guys think, me being a consecrated layperson, I would take a gun? No. There's a certain number of things I would surely not take. Why? Because that object represents something. It represents violence, first of all. So He chose things for a reason, because they already echoed a certain significance. What is that? Well, for the bread, first of all, it's a product of the earth. It comes from wheat. And not just that, because bread doesn't just grow out of the earth. It was made by human hands. And finally, it's daily food. The fact that the bread He took is daily food is really important. Now, the bread at Passover is a little different. It's flatbread. And it has another meaning that adds to the others. That meaning is misery and freedom. Misery because it's flatbread, so we say, oh, we can't eat, totally grow bread. And also freedom because the story tells in Exodus that they were cooking their bread, and all of a sudden they had to escape really quickly because Moses went down the hill and said, we can go now. After the 10 plagues, it's done. Take your things. We're leaving now. So they took the bread out of the ovens and it just went flat. So they brought lots of it. So it's bread of freedom. Okay, so that's all the significance that's associated with the bread at the Last Supper. What does Jesus add to that? Well, you can't add more. He added himself, his body. So wherever the bread comes from is important to my eyes. Whatever happened to that bread before it gets on the altar is important to me because it has all that significance, and then we add the fact that it's his body. So, as an environmentalist, the question I ask, is the bread we're using certified organic? You guys are probably surprised, but last year in Quebec, 174 lakes were infested with blue algae. The monks at Saint-Benoît-du-Lac could not take the water from the lake to make their cheese. They had to import water from Montreal. Why? Because of agriculture mostly. The agriculture is using too much artificial fertilizers. So we're getting wheat out of it, but creating so many environmental problems afterwards. So I don't want the bread on the altar, which becomes Jesus' body, to have environmental problems before. So if we could encourage to have certified organic, I think it would be a step in the right direction. And it would be a church taking stand on that environmental crisis. Now, I said the bread, now the wine. Blessed are you, Lord, God of all creation. Through your goodness, we have this wine to offer, fruit of the vine and work of human hands. It will become our spiritual drink. So the wine, as the bread, already has significance. What is it? Well, it's a product of the vine, grapes. We don't just have wine coming from streams. It has to be human-made. And finally, it's a party drink. It's a drink we drink at feasts. Anyway, for the Jews, they didn't drink it every day. It was for special occasions. So that also shows the fact that if we use it at occasions and you feel a little party-ish, well, the wine represents vitality. But the bread is everyday stuff. It's your body. During Passover, the wine represents the suffering. There's one part of that special meal, the seder, that you dip a finger in the wine and put it on your napkin. It does the 10 plagues. So that wine represents suffering. It also represents alliance or covenant, because the wine during that meal represents the blood from the lamb. The lamb on the doors, the blood. Yeah. What did Jesus add to all of that? His blood. His vitality. So, as I said in the first time, if we're going to choose a certain type of wine and bring it on the altar and present it and say that this will become Jesus' blood, well, should we ask ourselves what we're going to do with the wine itself? Where does it come from? What are we going to do with the bottle? It's a simple question, but recycling is an important part. And me, personally, recycling is praying. I'll tell you why. Every time, let's say I take an aluminum can, and after having drunk everything I needed to drink, well then, I could throw it in the garbage. But then, I would be acting like a spoiled child, saying, gimme, God. I want all the resources that we can find on the planet, but I don't want any responsibility afterwards. Or, after using that aluminum can, I could put it in the recycling bin, and when I do that, I am honoring the resource and thanking God for that resource. The next point. the wine we're buying, is it bought locally? Now, we actually produce wine in Quebec. Here's an example. The red dot, City of Quebec. Right beside is one of the companies that make wine here in Quebec. So on average, we could say maybe 100 or 40 kilometers for the wine to come from the winery to the church. Let's say an average 40 kilometers. That's a certain amount of greenhouse gases put in the atmosphere with the trucks. I decided just before coming here to ask different churches on their bottles, where does the wine come from? Almost every bottle of wine for the Mass in Quebec that I asked in the churches come from California. Here's what the truck has to do to bring the stuff to Quebec. 4,000 kilometers. Sending more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, heating the whole thing up, and causing lots of ecological unbalance everywhere. It's an indirect consequence we have. Climate change is not like other types of pollution where you have toxic stuff and you put it on the side and then you see everything die. It's not quite how it works. The greenhouse gases build up and influence the whole planet. And the poor are the ones that are going to suffer the most and the first. On that, I'd like to add carbon credits. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. I know lots of people to come to the conference here probably took the plane. So, and just by the way, my presentation is not to put guilt on you guys. It's to make us, all of us, become aware of what we don't know. Okay? So the carbon credits, what happens? Well, when we take the plane, there's lots of CO2 that's expelled in the atmosphere. I don't know if you knew this, but planes at 10 or 12 kilometers up, when they put CO2 there, it has twice as big an impact as cars on the ground. So if they produce lots of CO2, it just so happens that someplace like in Zimbabwe, they have a power plant that produces lots of CO2 also. Now, us in the rich countries, we can change our technology. We have the money, we have the economy, we have all that. In Zimbabwe, not quite the same thing. So if we're ready to take the plane, if we say, okay, I'm going to have a huge impact while I take the plane and send lots of greenhouse gases, well, maybe I can take just a bit of that money and send it for projects that will reduce the impact on climate change. This is one of the projects that actually worked fine with the carbon credits. And they actually changed for wind power. Those are the power lines going through the forest to bring the power, rather than having a thermal power plant. So here in Canada, it's called Planet Air. If ever you want to buy carbon credits, you're going from point A to point B, and it calculates the distance, and you can pay your credits directly online. Montreal to Vancouver is about $50. And you become carbon neutral. It means whatever you put in the atmosphere will be absorbed somewhere else. That's thinking globally. So now back to the spiritual stuff. The Eucharistic prayer, number 3, has something very interesting that has the word creation in it. Father, you are holy indeed, and all creation rightly gives you praise. Now, I remember hearing this prayer and just stopping. And I was in a course with biology and evolution, and we had just seen the past extinctions. So I was thinking all creation, yeah, but all creation, it changes with time. If we go back 500,000 years ago, that's when life really started sprouting everywhere. If we go back 1 billion years ago, there was just bacteria in the ocean. But 500 million years, that's when it started. And going on land. And so a first extinction. And a second extinction. And a third. And a fourth. The fifth extinction happened 65 million years ago. That's where the dinosaurs disappeared. Having no more huge reptiles, well, that's how the mammals, right, I had the French word in my head, mammifère. That's how the mammals had the chance to reproduce like crazy. All of these were astronomical events. Asteroids going in, or sometimes it was the Earth's crust and creating lots of volcanoes that would block the sun. Usually it was always climate change. Something happened and changed the climate, got so cold that everything started dying. Now, here's the scary part. We have started the 6th extinction on our planet. And it is not because of an astronomical event. It's because of one species. And guess what? It's because of the smartest. So here's what biologists say. The rhythm of extinctions right now is 100 to 1,000 times superior to the natural rate. Human activity is directly and indirectly responsible for these extinctions. We can't just play the ostrich and say, nah, it's not happening. It is. So what are we going to do about it? Are we really the smartest and the wisest creature on the planet? The modern extinctions, what are they caused by? Just a quick overview. Loss of natural habitats. I think it's cool that people like to live in the country. That's good. The low populations. Some people live in the cities. Good idea. Lots of people in the same space. But suburbs are the worst idea we could have had. It's the worst of both worlds. You don't have lots of land, but you're still stuck to other people, and you have to take your car all the time to go around. You can't even walk to get something. So, anyway, that's one of the causes of loss of habitats. Air pollution, obviously, can cause extinctions. Water pollution. Soil pollution. Those are all direct consequences. Global warming is indirect. And finally, introduction of exotic species. Here in the St. Lawrence River, the St. Lawrence River didn't look like that 30 years ago. The little things you see on the bottom of the lake are zebra mussels. So zebra mussels, if you want to see closer, they're about the size of your thumb, and they reproduce like crazy. They don't have any predators here. On that shopping cart, you can count 100,000 zebra mussels. But they come from the Caspian Sea. So obviously they were stuck on boats, and it's because of our habits that they got here. And they're wreaking havoc in the St. Lawrence. There was a loss of biodiversity because of that. So okay, those are the reasons for extinctions. In Quebec here, we have 6 animal species that have disappeared. They're extinct. All because of excessive hunting. So I'll present them to you. First one, the striped bass. We can't find it in the St. Lawrence anymore. Thankfully, we can still find striped bass near New Brunswick. So they still exist there. But because of overfishing here, we can't find them anymore. Next one, the red deer. There used to be loads of red deer here when the French colonized first. But because of hunting, we can't find them anymore. Thankfully, there are still some in Western Canada. The Eskimo curlew. This one is a big question mark because it hasn't officially been called extinct on the planet because we saw one in 1990 in Argentina. This is an amazing bird. It would fly from the North Pole to Argentina, always following where summer is. An amazing bird. But since it went through all those populations of humans, we would hunt it, and it's pretty close to extinction. Those are 3 animals we can't find in Quebec, but we can find them elsewhere. Here are 3 animals we cannot find on the planet anymore. Starting with the Labrador duck. This duck was not very fast on his legs. Probably that's the reason why he was extinct. Very colorful. A good contrast, easy to see. Apparently his song was very interesting. And the eggs were edible. So we would hunt the bird and take the eggs. So that's why we can't find him anymore. This is a creature that is no longer living with us. A giant penguin called the great auk. This one is, the English arrived here in Quebec in 1760. And even the English didn't have the chance to see this bird very much. Because the French, when they arrived, they hunted almost to extinction. And now it is totally extinct. And finally, the passenger pigeon. The last representative of the species died in Cincinnati Zoo in 1914. So we can even date the day the species went extinct. This, in French, is called la tourte. Les francophones, vous connaissez la tourtière? Tourtière is meat pie that we do here in Quebec. And it keeps the name from that passenger pigeon. We still call it tourtière because we mix up the meats. It tastes differently. But it's part of our culture, but we don't make tourtière with tourte anymore. The passenger pigeon does not exist anymore. And it was such a colorful bird. There are no more. So if we go back to the Eucharistic prayer, Father, you are holy indeed, and all creation rightly gives you praise. So should we actually reformulate this prayer? It could become, Father, you are holy indeed, and all of what's left of creation rightly gives you praise. Now, obviously, we're not going to do that, okay? This would be more realistic, but still. There's a great scare with biologists that maybe 1/3, or in worst case, half of all the animals, of the animal species. Okay, so 1/3 or even 1/2 of the animal species will be extinct if we continue in this direction. So this is a reality. I don't think we should say the prayer like this. But if ever in our churches we have a homily or catechesis or we're telling people about different parts of the Eucharist, we can stop on this prayer and say, all creation rightly gives you praise. All representatives of all species are praising God. And what right do we have as humans to destroy a whole species? I don't believe we have that right. And if I had St. Francis of Assisi right beside me, for sure he'd say, no, with an Italian accent. Now, communion. Very short look at communion and the link it could have with environment. Now, I'm from Quebec, 95% Catholic, up till recently. And this is what I'm used to. When I hear communion, that's what I think of. And communion hasn't always been like that in history. And communion hasn't always been viewed like that through the cultures in the world today. But it's just funny how long we've been doing communion like that. I hate the expression distributing communion. You can't do that. You can't distribute hope. You can't distribute love. You live it. You share it. So here's a painting I saw in Italy. I do not believe Jesus gave communion like that. But if we go see in Haiti, this is how communion is lived. As soon as they get the bread, or the body of Christ, they start dancing. And I've been to the World Youth Day. I know. They bring out the tam-tams, and it's a great celebration. And here I am as a Quebecer on my knees. I'm not saying one is good, the other's bad. I'm just saying it's different. We shouldn't close our minds to the fact that it can only be one way. And the word communion is so important because it is not a religious word. When I was with my friends in a campfire, we would start singing religious songs or other types of songs. And up to a point, we would just get with the rhythm and understand the people around us. That's communion. It's common and union. It's being with other people in the same mindset, with the same goals, with the same heart. And what's so amazing between atheists being in communion and Christians being in communion is that Jesus said it. When 2 or 3 are united in my name, I'm with them. So 10 atheists living communion on a campfire, it's 10 people. 10 Christians, it's actually 11. St. Francis of Assisi went one step further. He not only understood he had to love his brothers and sisters as humans, but he was living communion with other creatures. He didn't just love nature because it looked nice. He was in communion with nature. All of those creatures were his brothers and sisters. I think that can inspire us today. Because if Moses went up on the mountain and got the name of God, which has the verb to be in it, well, that was the first sign that God exists. And then David had a special relationship with God. He said, God is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. So that was one step more. From just existing to a special relationship, that was the first step. Then 1,000 years after David, it's Jesus. And he said, God isn't just your shepherd, he's your father. And then 1,000 years after that, St. Francis comes and said, well, Father, not just for humans, but for all creatures. They're our brothers and sisters. And in this environmental crisis, I am convinced that we need that message here in the church. So we're all invited to act as guardians of creation. This is not a movement, it's just an expression that I'm sharing with everybody. I have a website with lots of information, and the 3 next slides are stuff that you can find on the website. This is a 14-year-old kid who drew this for me. He was imagining a greener church, a greener Eucharist. So here's the things we can add to our celebrations to make them greener. We can add in the prayers of the faithful the word environment. To reserve a special space to pray for other creatures, for our environment. In the penitential prayers, we can say, God, well, I haven't been recycling enough. Please take mercy. I think it's important. Ecological values in the scriptures. That the priest can play a huge role for this. And as I've heard in Southern America, there was, in certain communities, something important done by the priests to do environmental education, to protect the rivers so people could still have a river later on. All the decor in the church. You can have more plants, more flowers, a globe, a jug of water. I talked about before. Maybe the liturgy committee could talk about organic bread, local wine. And finally, I'm dazzled to the number of cars that we find in front of a church every Sunday. Mostly considering that, in many cases, it's a local church. It was built because it was close to people. So when it's possible, we can, walk, take a bike, or carpool. It's the same people in the neighborhood going to the same place. So when it's possible, I think we should encourage that. We can look at the feasts throughout the year. St. Francis of Assisi, obviously a great choice. St. Kevin from Ireland, he was close to other creatures. That's on June 3rd. St. Clement of Rome on November 23rd. We could talk about environment at those times. Or we could take non-religious celebrations. World Water Day, for example. Earth Day. Car-Free Day. In my diocese, we might be doing this year or maybe next year, but we'll encourage churches on the weekend that's closest to Car-Free Day to tell people, sorry guys, but the parking won't be available on that day. We'll close it up, and then we'll ask kids from catechesis to draw on it, to draw with chalk. That way the place is not reserved for machines, but for kids. So that's an idea. And, it would obviously force people to have better habits and maybe carpool. It would be the first day for carpooling. Finally, tricks for a greener church, energy efficiency. There's a movement in Canada called Kairos, and they give a document for energy efficiency for religious buildings. They give all the steps so a religious building can be converted and basically use less energy, which is a good idea because we have to pay that electricity, basically. In the church, we can encourage water conservation, recycling, composting. In cities, for example, the church always has a little bit of ground, but all the people live in apartments. So for the community, the church can be a spot where there can be composting. Finally, You can have a little boutique with eco products. It's possible, well, Greenpeace has that on their website, how to make soap or different cleaning products that are non-toxic. So a volunteer can do that in the church, and the church can have a little shop, and that's money that comes in for the church. At the same time, we're helping our environment, helping our health too. Many churches here have a second-hand clothes shop. In French, we call it friperie. So that's great. That's reusing materials. And finally, plant trees. On the southern side of the church, you can plant a vine. That way it'll cool off the church in summer. And I feel so sorry when I see elderly volunteers in the church that are mowing the lawn. When I see that, I say, there's another choice. We don't have to have green lawns in front of the church. You could plant clover and or thyme, and that stays on the ground. It needs less water, and you never need to cut it. And it's really, really beautiful too. So that's a good option. As a conclusion, I say, okay, I'm 27 years old. I only have a certificate in theology. So I'll go see the big guys. See what they say about the church and the environment. Here are the 4 closing remarks. We must therefore encourage and support the ecological conversion, which in recent decades has made humanity more sensitive to the catastrophe to which it has been heading. By John Paul II in 2001. Okay? When people in the church say, oh, the environmentalists are just so alarmist, it's because the situation is alarming. And even John Paul II knew that. When he says, the catastrophe to which it has been heading, that's alarming. So we need a conversion inside the church. And actually, since we're people of faith, and it always shows in our eyes, we can have an influence on other people. Okay, here's another big guy. Benedict XVI. He says, there is no doubt that one of the fields in which it seems urgent to take action is that of safeguarding creation. He said that last September. Closer to home, in Quebec, there was a special letter written by a number of archbishops. There is one present here in the room. And this is just amazing. Unfortunately, I only have the French one in paper here, and I don't have many. But on my website, which I'll be showing at the end, you can find the English version. And it finishes like this. Only a genuine conversion will help us mend the ruptures and reestablish our life relationship with nature, our sisters and brothers, and the Creator of life. One of the men who wrote this letter is l'Archevêque de Rimouski, Bertrand Blanchet. He's right there. I'd like you to clap your hands, please. I was so shy when he came in the room. Finally, let's say I got to convince you guys that in the church we can do this and we need an ecological conversion. But then you get out of the room, and in a week or 2 from now, you say, where am I going to start? Am I ever going to do this? And then you get scared. Well, there's one prophet that had the same problem back in the Old Testament. His name is Jonah. You know the story? I'll tell it just for fun. So Jonah was supposed to go to Nineveh. Okay, the map, like this. Nineveh's there. He lives about here. And he gets the message from God, okay, you're going to go tell those guys that they have to change their ways of doing, otherwise they're going to destroy themselves. He says, no way! And he goes the other way around, takes the boat, and goes off. He gets gobbled up by a fish, thrown back on the shore, and then he walks back to Nineveh, convinced that he has to do this. He was saved by God, so okay, I'll do it. Then he goes to Nineveh, and the guy is convinced this is never going to work. Going to tell people you have to convert soon, otherwise you're going to be destroyed? That'll never work. He goes into town, and it says in the Bible it takes 3 days to walk the whole town. He just starts saying, you have to change your ways of doing. This is really important. And the whole message goes through the town in one day. Everybody knows about it, and even the king repents, and he puts ashes on his head. People change their ways of doing. And I think this story is amazing, because it shows that even though the situation looks grim, and we don't want to be in the situation to tell people that they have to change, sometimes, and even very often, they already have it in themselves, the power to change. They just need a reminder. And I think that's what's happening in the church right now. People know there's an environmental crisis. We only need a couple of people who are convinced to tell them, we can do this. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Excuse me, hi.
Wow.
Hi, could I just ask a question really quick? Okay. In regard to what you said...
Just one moment, please. Norman, you want to ask a question?
I want to ask a question, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Norman, regarding what you said about artificial pesticides,
Right.
I absolutely love what you're doing with environment and the Eucharist, because it's so essential, especially given that we're facing a global food crisis,
Right.
especially that's affecting the most poorest countries, with grain and stuff like that being put towards ethanol and these greenhouse, or these, that are supposed to change, the use of petroleum. With regard to the pesticide comment, it's, in my opinion, I'm a student of social justice and peace at Christ the King University College, and in my mind, it's a part of like a greater problem. Seeds are now being patented by Monsanto Corporation, and what they're doing is there's a seed it's a suicide seed, and what happens is it cross-pollinates in other farmers' fields. And there was a case in Manitoba wherein 4 generations of farming and cultivating seeds for this farmer's crops, a Monsanto seed cross-pollinated with it. And what happened was Monsanto scientists crossed into their field and found that their seed had cross-pollinated into his seed, and he was sued for this. And in Saskatchewan, that's what it was, not Manitoba. Sorry, pardon me. And this is a tragic thing that is happening more and more. And these pesticides are actually, they're needed with these suicide seeds, because they're becoming really, the pesticide is required, and these are the kind of pesticides that are polluting that Trappist lake that you mentioned.
Right.
Yeah, so it's a part of like a much larger problem, and I'm wondering, as a Catholic, we are guardians of creation, and I'm wondering within church parishes and communities if we could take time to learn more about this. And this isn't something that we will find in the general media. This is something we really have to search deep into, like indie media, things that, media that's not necessarily easy to find, but that is out there. And also with regard to, the bread of life, and the bread that feeds the poor, like, staples in like wheat and spaghetti in Italy and stuff, like it's getting out of control. And if we could maybe petition for like awareness and stuff like that, that would be great. So I just wanted to thank you, Norman, for your work, okay?
My pleasure. Thanks for the comment.
Hi there. My name is Monique. We've been doing certified organic medicinal products for...
Speak louder, please.
We've been doing medicinal...
It is.
It's not close.
But it's not loud enough.
Hello?
Nice.
Is it better?
Wait.
Yeah. My name is Monique. I'm from Ontario. We've been doing medicinal herbal products for over 20 years. So we've been doing organic for over almost 30 years now, my husband and I. And what you're saying is really important, but I think it's really important in the ecological movement that we don't infiltrate our ideas into the liturgy. It's really important that they get separated.
Oh.
I personally feel that because I came 30 years ago from a background of New Age. That's 30 years ago.
Okay.
Like you might be looking at it now, 30 years later. We knew about Mount Santo seed 35 years ago, about Codex 35 years ago. So I am a convert from 21 years ago. And I think it's really important, and I think it's very holy to give God his right place on the altar. I'm 100% for the ecology, organic gardening. We've been doing it for 30 years. I've been visiting, we've been saving seed for 30 years. But it's very important that us as Catholic, we have an inheritance, a liturgical inheritance that I don't think that we've lost to a certain degree. So we can't mix ecology and the liturgy together on the altar. It doesn't work. That's not what it's about. It's really important that we don't do that. I'm telling you from experience, because I've been doing organic, ecological saving for 30 years. So it's really important that, yes, a parish and the children and a school needs to be aware of, not using plastic bags. I've been using cotton bags for 10 years in the car. So these are kind of natural things that the third world country do, because they don't have. Here we have so much that we want to bring on the altar to show that somehow we have this ecological mindset that's going to save the world. But it's not. The Eucharist is what's going to save the world. So it's really important that we don't mix the two. And I personally, your presentation is great, and I think that you have a vision. And it's so fantastic to see that a young man like you could go and take what you have, but be very careful, because when you hang around people like Al Gore and Suzuki, you know what? It's dangerous to a certain degree. So I just say to you, there's a lot of resources that maybe you're not aware of. People like us who've been around for 30 years doing what we're doing, and it's solidarity with the poor. Yes, the poor needs to have their seeds saved. They need to grow their own grain, and we need to have local wine and local bread and organic farms. It's really important, but that cannot infiltrate onto our liturgy and the altar, because when it does that, it's a mess. It doesn't have to be, because the church is ancient, it has its ritual, it has its beauty, and it just has to be rebalanced.
Well, exactly.
And it's very important that when the ecology movement comes in, that we won't get the two confused.
No,
I'm sorry.
You're right.
I'm sorry, I don't
part
know
of my
exactly
project,
how to put that together, but I just feel from my heart that you're doing very good work. You're young, and if I was your age 27 years ago, I would have done maybe what I've done. We've been doing it for over 30 years, so I'm excited for you. I think it's really important.
Thank you.
But we have to be very careful how we do it, so that we just don't hurt our church more than it is.
I agree. And what I do with Guardians of Creation, anyway, my intent, is to look in the heritage we have in 2,000 years and look at the stories of the saints and just make that bring back, and we can be aware of all the power we have for that.
Hi, I'm Dan from Montreal. Norman Mann, you're my hero, absolutely. I'll be following in your footsteps. And so I want to know, basically, what would you say are your biggest challenges to approach the Catholic community? Because I, like you, see a lot of potential in this community for environmental activism, but I also see a lot of apathy. And maybe it's because a lot of Catholics feel like the two don't mix, but I think what you just demonstrated today is that they do mix very well. So how do you respond to this? Like, no, like don't mix these two things together. We can't do that. They mix. We've proven that already. Now let's live it. But how do you tell that to people? How do you like transmit that message?
Well, my observation is when I started 4 years ago, about half the people told me directly, the church has nothing to do with environment. We don't have to take a stand for that. It has nothing to do. We help the poor. We help the handicapped. That's our job, socially. Today, it's totally different. In 2008, I'd say 95% of the people involved in the church and the priests and my own bishop is totally for the fact that we do environmental education in our church, in the Mass or outside the Mass. But it's our responsibility. Yeah. And just an anecdote, this year I was asked to be on a committee because my diocese, Saint-Jean-Longueuil, is celebrating 75 years, a young diocese. And by celebrating, our theme is Entre fleuve et rivière, between the river and the bigger river, between rivers. And since it has to do with rivers and our theme, and they decided to say, okay, environment is very important, so they called me, and we're doing different actions during the year, so helping the church take position through that. So I think there's potential right now. I think the idea in the church has changed in just 4 years, so there's possibilities.
May I say a word? Father Roux from Paris. I work in Pax Christi since 10 years in environment and in theology of environment. I met Norman in the bus recently.
He's the Archbishop of Tours, and I was just chatting with him on the bus. Thank you, Father.
I'm not bishop. First, I want to thank you for the excellent speech about Eucharist and environment. I know the topic. I did it also in Europe meetings, and I really appreciate it. It's excellent. Second point, I want to thank publicly the Canadian bishops. I think there's one there. Because your letter has been extremely useful for our work in France and help and stimulate French bishops who are sometimes a little bit shy on the topic. And I have the good news to tell you, in 1 month they are also going to deliver their own message, and you have helped them. Thank you for them.
Wow, great.
A fourth point, if you want to read a very good book from a French journalist Catholic, I recommend Patrice de Planquette, L'écologie de la Bible à nos jours, pour en finir avec les idées reçues, to finish with the old ideas. It's excellent. L'écologie de la Bible à nos jours, here it is. Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Lévesque, or rather Norman, we are most grateful for sharing with us your knowledge and experience. We hope you will pursue all your goals in your life with His everlasting grace spread upon you. God bless us all. Let's clap.